and Jerry will talk about how we store those seeds now. And so we started to direct sow some of the seeds, which is just what it sounds like. Just sprinkle an area that has been cleared with seeds. And we've started that project at Horseshoe Pond and have been monitoring it throughout the summer. And we actually got pretty good germination from that. And then we also included live staking this year. And live staking is just cutting a stem or a branch off of a plant and sticking it right back into the ground somewhere. It's a little bit more technical than that. We do that when plants are dormant, and then we take them out of a cooler. We stratify them or put them through a false winter process, and then we'll do live staking in the spring. But we constantly have two problems with our propagation project, and that is space and space. Really. So the propagation house here at the Tom Ridge Center is very, very small, and we share that space with other organizations that are our members that we do welcome in, but we also probably could fill up a full-size greenhouse with just our seedlings. So we have our things on the floor, and everybody else gets the premium bench space. And then the facility on the park is a great facility, but it's kind of a circle that's been cleared among trees, and unless we start taking out more trees, we cannot expand our site. And every year we have put new landscape fabric down to increase the area where we can hold plants, and we're out of space. So we wanted to look at two methods that took very little space, but still would get us where we need to go as far as the number of plants and installations that we were doing on the park. So these are our current planting sites. We have Leo's Landing, which I can point to. Where's our pretty Leo's? This is Leo's. We have Head of the Park. This is Surprise Pond, which Holly mentioned, and we also do a little bit along Thompson's Bay. And we included 3 more planting sites. And so we have a picture. Okay, here we go. This is Misery Bay, and actually if you look in the foreground of that picture, you'll see we're preparing plants to be put in. We had a school group come out and install those for us. And so it's just about 15 or 20 truckloads of plants that get brought down to an area, and they worked along that shoreline. We also have this area. You can see the houseboats. That's Horseshoe Pond, and you'll see another picture of that a little bit further out in the slide, like the actual planting day that we had. That's a really interesting area because the nutrients seem to be a little high in that area, and then also the incidences of HAB occurrences are in that area. So we're trying to increase some of the native vegetation there, and hopefully I'm not sure if that'll change water quality or not, but it just an interest of mine, I guess, in particular. And then we have this area down here, which is Niagara Pond, and that is directly across from Misery Bay. So if you have Misery Bay on one side, on the other is a very large wetland called Niagara Pond. So that is going to enable us not only to do more restoration on the park, but we are also increasing our acreage and number of plants that we're installing every year. And we have a couple pictures of students and Weed Warrior. Here's our Weed Warrior group. Here, this is our Horseshoe Pond. You can see the Coast Guard station in the background here. And these are all new plantings here. So that was a pretty cool rainy day. And this is our Misery Bay planting. Like I said, we have a lot of volunteer help with this. This year, just a quick update as far as numbers. There's 2 of us working on the restoration project now, and so we actually more than doubled the amount of plants put in. So it's hard to tell from this slide, but it was 3,848 plants that went in, as opposed to a little over 1,800 in the year prior. So I feel like we're really excelling now. We can make more plants and we can install more plants, which is basically the point of what we're doing here, I guess. And then Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you. And you're going to talk about the seed bank and the seed bank.
So the first seed bank that we're going to talk about is the soil seed bank. We collected samples from the locations that Jen previously mentioned, the priority wetlands on Presque Isle. Once they were collected, we simulated a dormancy period by placing them in a walk-in cooler for 3 months, and once they'd gone through that period, samples will be dried, screened, just to remove any material that, like live tissue, if there's leaves or root material, you don't want that in the sample, because everything we want to grow from the seeds that are present in the soil. Once that's done, they're put on a couple different medias. We started with a sand layer and then did a layer of peat, actually potting mix, and then the actual soil that was collected was spread over that. They were grown under a couple different conditions. We had a saturated sample, submerged, and one that was kind of kept just damp. It was allowed to dry out between waterings completely. And that kind of let us see, because the samples were collected kind of along a transect, and that provided different scenarios for different plants to germinate. Once the plants were grown out, we were able to identify them and catalog what was grown and what was in the soil. They were then removed from the sample, and if it was something that we were able to use in the restoration efforts, we kept it, potted it up into a bigger container, and if it wasn't, then it was removed. So things we wouldn't use that were found were purple loosestrife, things like that, invasives that, again, we don't want to plant back on the park. Here's an example of one of the trays, and this is actually set up behind everyone in the lobby now. These are a saturated sample, and I believe there's 6 different trays here and a control, which you can't see, but the control was basically just grown, or no soil was put on it, was just a soilless mix, and that was done just because there's always something that blows into greenhouses. Generally, in our situation, it's cottonwood, but that, until the cottonwood seeds came in, that's all that we actually saw in it. So. And the other soil, this is still soil seed bank. This allows us to focus our restoration efforts. We know what to grow or what is historically growing in the area and has done well there. And it also kind of gives us a warning as to what invasives may be presenting back into the area. And the other seed bank, every year for the wetland restoration project, we've been collecting seed to grow future plants from. So this seed bank will allow us to actually store the seeds for a longer period of time, because they're stored under specific humidities, temperatures, and they're dried and then put into airtight jars with a desiccant. With this project, we're hoping to do germination tests to actually see the longevity of the seed, how long they're viable for, and that will actually let us know how long we can keep the seed and if we need to collect yearly or if we can have larger harvests one year and then reduce it the following year. So. And this is Jen cleaning some Virginia creeper seeds actually on the right, and the photo on the left is some of the seeds that we've collected, cleaned, and are ready to go into the walk-in cooler. And Jen's going to talk about Weed Warriors again.
Okay, my last update for 2020. The Weed Warrior group of Presque Isle is not new on the park. But I'll explain what it is. It's a volunteer group that comes out. They're responsible for monitoring, removing, and identifying invasive plants on the park. They do meet once a week. We actually meet Tuesdays from 10 to 11:30, so if anyone is interested, shoot me an email. And we do take a little bit of a break in the winter just because it's hard to pull plants if there's snow on the ground. So, but what we concentrate are removing invasive species that can be manually removed. So pulled out by hand, dug out by a shovel. If it's something like Phragmites or cattail, like Holly showed you, that's not something that we can work on. But in the past, they really focused on garlic mustard and then Oriental bittersweet. But unfortunately, those aren't the only invasive species that we have on the park. So we've expanded our monitoring to include not only the park, but the new property, which I guess is technically also the park, and Erie Bluff State Park. And there's all different invasives. Mark, the new one that we found up on the new property, aside from like hundreds of tree of heaven or Alanthus, which is the spotted lanternfly host, was Japanese hops. And because that site was a residential property at one time, we had things like hosta and daylilies and all kinds of daisies and things like that. So I'm thinking that some of the stuff that was planted up there was probably put in somebody's yard as an ornamental. But I wanted to give a shout out to the Weed Warriors because they do an amazing job. And this is my last slide, no, second to last slide. It's a thank you. And we are funded, it starts at NIFLIF and it comes all the way through to the Regional Science Consortium. We also have some volunteer and financial donors that help assist with our project. And then we also get a lot of technical assistance from Dr. White in the very back. So we wanted to include a little picture of him and a thank you. And then does anyone have any questions? This is your chance. Any burning questions? Yes, Amber.
Is there a plan to remove the tree of heaven from the new location?
Actually, we had Western Pennsylvania Conservancy come out. We notified Pennsylvania DCNR. DCNR asked Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to come out and remove. We've been monitoring that, so we have a few living individuals up there still, but not many. And most of them were killed. The larger trees that were on that property had previously been hack and squirted, which is another cool killing name. And that, I'm assuming Hollies and Terns did that. The issue that we do have with that property is there is an adjacent property that has an entire tree line of Tree of Heaven on it. I'm not sure how they would feel about removing those trees, but it would help us out a lot because I feel like now those mature trees are seeding onto our new area. And so we do monitor that. We pay particular attention to Tree of Heaven now because of the spotted lanternfly. We found a number of individuals on the park. But it was nothing like what was at the new property. That was I've never seen more Alanthus.
And when they did come up, they did treat the hops as well, and appears to have got a very good hit on that. So
Yeah, that looks dead. So, yeah. So, all right. Yes?
How do you decide what to plant in a given area?
Also gone out and run transects in a lot of the wetlands. So we'll work from the shoreline all the way in till about waist deep or as deep as we feel comfortable walking out there. To do not only like the shoreline, but things that are submerged aquatics, floating aquatics. And we try to do percent covers. So we sort of know what's supposed to be where. And we will kind of plant the same things back in. So if we see great blue lobelia at one site, we won't transfer it to all our sites. We'll just try to keep it in one area. And so
it's kind of where the seed bank, soil seed bank study comes into play too. It lets us know what was historically there and what we can try to put back in the area.
And so when we're harvesting the seeds, we're recording a location to not only like where it was harvested from, the year, but any other like conditions, like if there's a heavy population of it there too. So we try to keep the same kinds of things in each of the wetlands.
Fluctuations in water levels though can make that difficult too, because something that would typically be terrestrial when the water comes up, it's underwater then.
Surprise. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is that not only do we talk about the invasives that are removed, a lot of times with the grantors, the success story was 100 acres of Phragmites was removed. However, like Holly was saying, it needs to continue to be managed. Native plants need to continue to go in, but the success story is so much greater than how many invasive plants were removed. It really goes into the how healthy or reestablishing the habitat as a whole. And so part of what is conducted at the Regional Science Consortium is also monitoring many other different species that make up that ecosystem. So Sarah and Sean are going to talk to us about some of those biological surveys that are being conducted.
Good morning, everybody. Like Jeanette said, my name is Sean Dalton. I'm the Lab and Field Manager here for the Regional Science Consortium.
And I'm Sarah Magian. I'm the Education Manager and Restoration Biologist for the Regional Science Consortium.
And so in a lot of these same areas that you've already heard about all this treatment happening, we're going to talk about the biological monitoring that's happening along with that. So before we get into that, though, a little bit more background on the grant and some of the goals of it. Within these priority wetland sites, it's really a goal to restore and protect the biodiversity within these wetlands. Historically, these wetlands have been areas that a lot of native fish and amphibian species, as well as mussels and macroinvertebrates, have used as nursery habitat in order to reproduce and continue to exist as they have. Due to the invasion of a lot of these invasive plant species, particularly in these wetland areas, Phragmites and the narrow-leaf cattail, they've really come in, overtaken the area. Like Holly mentioned, the Phragmites actually will release a toxin into the soil that prevents anything else from growing. And the narrow-leaf cattail grows so densely together that things like fish and frogs literally cannot get in between those stalks in order to use their historic breeding habitat. So removing those has been very important for those animals' life cycles, as well as the propagation and